When Minority Report hit theaters in 2002, audiences saw a polished vision of tomorrow, floating screens, predictive justice, and a world that felt disturbingly close to possible. But beneath its sleek surface was a production shaped by secret summits, with real scientists, abandoned Hitchcock ideas brought back to life, and a philosophical tug-of-war over fate and free will. What most people never knew is that this film almost never existed in the form we know it. Its origins trace back to a completely different franchise, one that could have sent the entire project down a very different path. Number 1. Born as a Total Recall sequel. Long before precognition and gesture interfaces, this project didn't exist as its own film at all. In 1992, the rights to Philip K. Dick's short story were optioned as a potential sequel to Total Recall, another Dick adaptation, with Arnold Schwarzenegger expected to return to the role that had made the original a hit. The concept sat there for years, treated as franchise extension rather than a story worth telling on its own terms. Then the studio behind the deal collapsed. Carolco Pictures, the company financing the sequel, filed for bankruptcy, and the Total Recall follow-up died in the wreckage, along with several other projects the studio had in development. What survived was just the underlying rights, sitting dormant while the industry moved on. It took 5 more years before writer John Cohen's script found its way to a very different pair of collaborators. And by the time it did, nothing about the project resembled a sequel to anything. The Mars colonies and memory implants were gone. What remained was a murder mystery, wrapped around a question about fate, guilt, and whether the future can ever really be known in advance. Number 2. The director who never shot a frame. Before Spielberg entered the picture, Speed director Jan de Bont held the rights and developed his own version of the material, working through drafts and shaping an early take on the story. He never got the chance to direct a single scene of it. The project moved on without him, passing eventually into other hands entirely. De Bont still walked away with a producer credit on the finished film, a detail most audiences would never think to question. It is the kind of quiet footnote that Hollywood development produces constantly and rarely explains. A name permanently attached to a movie whose sets he never visited and whose actors he never directed. What changed the project's trajectory wasn't a rewrite or a new pitch. It was a phone call between 2 men who had been waiting nearly 2 decades to work together, and once that call happened, the version of the film de Bont had been building quietly stopped mattering. Number 3. 19 years waiting for the right call. Spielberg and Cruise first met on the set of Risky Business back in 1983, when Cruise was still a rising star, and Spielberg was already reshaping what a summer blockbuster could be. The two got along immediately, and conversations about eventually working together started almost right away. Then, for nearly 2 decades, nothing came of it. Multiple projects were floated and abandoned across those years, derailed by scheduling conflicts or creative directions that never quite lined up for both of them at once. Spielberg moved through historical dramas and adventure epics. Cruise anchored one action franchise after another. Neither man forgot the idea of eventually sharing a set, but neither found the right reason to force it either. It was Cruise who finally brought Cohen's script directly to Spielberg, skipping the usual layers of studio process and simply making the call himself. The material clicked in a way none of the earlier near misses had. After 19 years of almost, the partnership that had been discussed since 1983 finally had a film built around it. Number 4. The bureaucrat Dick actually wrote. Almost nothing about the John Anderton audiences know from the screen resembles the character Philip K. Dick originally put on the page. In Dick's 1956 story, Anderton is a balding, out-of-shape, middle-aged bureaucrat, a man defined by his position inside the pre-crime system rather than by any physical capability. He has no missing son, no ex-wife walking away from a broken marriage, no drug addiction numbing the grief. The story is set in New York, not Washington, and Anderton spends most of it thinking rather than running. The 3 precogs underwent an even stranger transformation. In Dick's original telling, they weren't tragic, drug-scarred prophets housed in a shrine-like chamber. They were simply named Donna, Jerry, and Mike, cognitively impaired people wired to machines with none of the mythology the film would eventually build around them. When the screenplay renamed them Agatha, Arthur, and Dashiell, some viewers connected the choices to Agatha Christie, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Dashiell Hammett, 3 writers who essentially built the modern detective story, for a film that is structurally one long detective story of its own. The screenplay stripped away Dick's cerebral bureaucrat and rebuilt him from scratch. Younger, athletic, grieving, addicted, and desperate enough to run. Tom Cruise brought a physical urgency to the role that the source material never asked for, turning a philosophical thought experiment about systems and power into something closer to a personal reckoning with guilt. Whether that transformation deepened the story or simply made it more marketable is a question fans of Dick's fiction have never fully agreed on. Number 5. The ending Dick never would have allowed. The finished film ends with pre-crime shut down, its prisoners pardoned, and its precogs quietly relocated to live out their lives in peace. Dick's original story ends nowhere close to that tidy. In his version, Anderton discovers there are actually 3 consecutive minority reports rather than 1, each precog's vision adjusted by the prediction that came before it, a cascading correction baked into the system's own logic. Rather than expose the flaw and dismantle the machine, Dick's Anderton makes a very different choice. To preserve pre-crime's credibility and protect the system he built his career defending, he goes ahead and murders the man he was originally accused of killing, proving the majority report correct after all. It is a bleak, self-defeating resolution, the kind of ending that fits Dick's lifelong suspicion of authoritarian institutions far more comfortably than Hollywood's instincts for closure. Screenwriters Scott Frank and John Cohen made the deliberate choice to soften that ending considerably, giving pre-crime a full shutdown and its precogs something resembling freedom. Story analyst Christine Culler, who read early drafts of the project years before production, later admitted she assumed Dick himself would have wanted something grimmer. As she put it, Spielberg knew how to please an audience, and if Dick had gotten his way, far fewer people would likely have gone to see it. Number 6. 15 Strangers, Building a Future. Before a single frame was shot, Spielberg wanted the film's version of 2054 to survive contact with people who actually study the future for a living. In 1999, he convened what became known as an Idea Summit, a 3-day gathering at a hotel in Santa Monica, organized through the Global Business Network, whose chairman Peter Schwartz and co-founder Stuart Brand helped assemble the group. He even invited journalist Joel Garreau to sit in and document the proceedings. The panel included 15 experts drawn from wildly different fields: architect Peter Calthorpe, novelist Douglas Coupland, computer scientist Neil Gershenfeld, biomedical researcher Sean Jones, virtual reality pioneer Jaron Lanier, and former MIT architecture dean William J. Mitchell, among others. Their assignment wasn't to invent flashy gadgets, it was to argue out, based on where real technology and urban planning were actually heading, what a plausible 50 years out future would look like: biometric surveillance, transportation, advertising, law enforcement, all of it grounded rather than invented from nothing. Science and technology advisor John Underkoffler, who sat in on the discussions, later pushed back gently on how utopian the finished film's world sometimes reads, compared to what the summit actually produced. He described the group's real conclusions as much grayer and more ambiguous than what eventually made it to screen, a reminder that even a film this committed to plausibility still had to compromise with drama. Number 7. The 80-page rulebook. Out of that 3-day summit came a document the production nicknamed the Tween 54 Bible, an 80-page guide compiled by production designer Alex McDowell that laid out the architectural, economic, political, and technological logic of the film's world in exhaustive detail. Every prop, billboard, and piece of background tech had to check against it before it made it anywhere near a set. The discussions from the summit didn't reshape the film's action sequences or plot mechanics in any direct way. What they did influence was the texture of the world itself, the more utopian visual details, the self-driving cars, the retina-scanning billboards, the automated highways gliding past Washington's older monuments. Nothing in that layer of the film was guesswork. It had all been argued over first. McDowell later reflected that a striking number of the ideas dreamed up for the film eventually became real products, citing the 3-dimensional interactive screens as one clear example. A rulebook built to keep a fictional future internally consistent ended up, almost by accident, sketching out actual technology roadmaps for the years that followed. Number 8. An interface built like real engineering. The gesture-controlled computer Anderton uses to sort through crime visions wasn't designed to look impressive on camera. It was engineered by MIT researcher John Underkoffler, who approached the assignment as genuine research and development rather than movie magic. He later said it would be hard to point to anything in the film's technology that had no grounding in real science, because the interface wasn't simplified for the sake of a shot. It was built to function. Spielberg's brief to Underkoffler was memorably abstract. He wanted the experience to feel like conducting an orchestra, sweeping and fluid rather than mechanical. Underkoffler translated that into an actual sign language of gestures for navigating video-like data, something he had already been quietly prototyping through his work at the MIT Media Lab before the film ever needed him. Production designer Alex McDowell had discovered Underkoffler's research almost by accident, touring MIT's Human-Computer Interaction Lab and getting intrigued by a computer interface controlled entirely by hand movement. A year later, he brought Underkoffler out to Hollywood, where the researcher built a non-functioning mock-up and pitched it directly to Spielberg and Cruise. Both approved it on the spot. Number 9. The body couldn't keep up with the design. Because the gesture system was built like a genuinely functional interface, rather than a simplified prop, performing it required Cruise to hold both arms above heart level for extended stretches at a time, something the human body simply isn't built to sustain comfortably. Reports from the production describe him needing regular breaks during those sequences, worn down by a piece of future technology that had never been softened for the camera's convenience. It's an unusual problem for a big-budget blockbuster to run into, the star growing physically exhausted, not from a stunt or a fight scene, but from operating a computer. Most film interfaces are designed purely for visual effect, meant to look complicated without actually demanding anything real from the performer using them. This one worked the opposite way. Uncomfortable specifically because it had been engineered to actually function. The exhaustion became, in its own strange way, evidence of how far the production had pushed authenticity. A prop built to merely look futuristic wouldn't have tired anybody out. This one did, because it wasn't really a prop at all. Number 10. The same room that built the Xbox Kinect. Jaron Lanier, the virtual reality pioneer who helped popularize the term itself decades earlier, brought working glove-tracking hardware into that same 1999 Idea Summit, demonstrating early prototypes of gesture-based control to the rest of the panel. Years later, Lanier went on to help develop the gesture recognition technology behind Microsoft's Kinect, the motion-sensing add-on that briefly reshaped how millions of people played video games in their living rooms. It's a strange thread to trace backward. A living room gaming peripheral and one of the most famous prop interfaces in science fiction cinema both grew out of research conversations happening in the same hotel conference room. Neither project directly copied the other, but both drew from the same well of late 1990s thinking about how bodies, rather than keyboards, might eventually control machines. Whether Lanier walked out of that summit already imagining a console accessory is unlikely. What's clear is that the ideas circulating in that room didn't stay confined to a movie screen. They kept surfacing in the real technology industry for the better part of the following decade. Number 11. Spielberg's ugliest, dirtiest movie. Most blockbusters chase a clean, glossy look. Spielberg asked cinematographer Janusz Kaminski for the opposite, telling him directly that he wanted this to be the ugliest, dirtiest movie he'd ever made. It's an unusual instruction for a $100 million summer release, and Kaminski took it seriously. The look was achieved partly through a bleach bypass process applied in post-production, a technique that strips color out of the finished image while preserving contrast, leaving deep shadows and blown-out highlights instead of glossy sci-fi sheen. Reports from the production describe the process pulling roughly 40% of the color out of the final print. New York Times critic Elvis Mitchell later described the resulting texture memorably, writing that the picture looked as if it had been shot on chrome, caught on the fleeing bumper of a late 1970s car. That drained, high-contrast palette wasn't simply an aesthetic flourish. Spielberg drew inspiration from classic film noir for the entire project, and a cold, washed-out image reinforced the movie's genuine debt to detective pictures decades older than its futuristic setting. A shiny, optimistic future would have undercut everything the story was trying to say about surveillance, guilt, and moral compromise. Number 12. Borrowing the bones of Bogart. For a movie set 50 years in the future, Spielberg's actual reference points were decades in the past. He has said he had director John Huston in his ear while making this film, revisiting The Maltese Falcon and Howard Hawks's The Big Sleep to study how those classic noir mysteries resolved, or often deliberately failed to resolve, their central puzzles. What struck him about those films wasn't their plotting, but their willingness to leave audiences slightly off balance. As he put it, those older mysteries didn't dot every I and cross every T. They asked more questions than they answered, trusting viewers to sit with ambiguity rather than handing them a clean solution. Spielberg wanted this story to interrogate its audience the same way. That noir backbone runs deeper into the film's structure than most viewers register on a first watch. The wrongly accused man on the run, the femme fatale ambiguity surrounding Agatha, the sense that the truth keeps shifting the closer Anderton gets to it. All of it traces back to genre conventions Spielberg studied specifically to import into a story that otherwise looks nothing like a black and white detective picture. Number 13. Hitchcock's Detroit Idea, finally filmed. Decades before this film existed, Alfred Hitchcock wanted to open North by Northwest with an unbroken single shot inside a Detroit automobile factory, following a car being assembled on the line in the background, while two characters talked in the foreground. The sequence was meant to end with someone opening the finished car's door and a corpse tumbling out. Hitchcock and his screenwriter Ernest Lehman could never work out a plausible reason to get their hero to Detroit in the first place, and the idea was scrapped entirely. Spielberg, a lifelong admirer of Hitchcock's work, resurrected the concept almost exactly, relocating it into a fully automated future car factory where Anderton, cornered by Witwer and his agents, ends up having an entire vehicle built and assembled around him on the line before driving it straight out of the plant. It's a sequence that plays as pure action to most audiences and as a direct, deliberate homage to a piece of film history that never got made to anyone paying close attention. The production shot the sequence at a real automated facility using genuine industrial equipment, including an actual welding robot, grounding a decades-old unfilmed idea in tangible physical machinery. A concept Hitchcock abandoned because he couldn't justify it narratively, finally found its justification inside a story explicitly built around automation, prediction, and inevitability. Number 14. An umbrella older than the film itself. The Hitchcock influence didn't stop at one sequence. During the mall chase, as Anderton drags a weakened Agatha through a crowd while SWAT teams close in, the two of them vanish inside a sea of open umbrellas, hiding in plain sight among dozens of identical strangers rather than trying to outrun their pursuers directly. It's a direct echo of the wrongman thrillers Hitchcock built his early reputation on, films like The 39 Steps and Saboteur, where a falsely accused protagonist survives less through brute escape than through blending into an oblivious crowd. Story analyst Christine Culler, who read multiple drafts of the project over the years, specifically recalled that sequence standing out to her as an homage the moment she encountered it, noting that it wasn't present in earlier versions of the screenplay she had covered. She credited the addition to either Spielberg or screenwriter Scott Frank, since it hadn't appeared in John Cohen's earlier drafts. It's the kind of detail that rewards familiarity with the genre Spielberg was quietly borrowing from throughout the entire production. Audiences who know Hitchcock's filmography catch the umbrella sequence instantly. Audiences who don't simply experience an effective piece of tension, unaware they're watching a 50-year-old storytelling trick updated for a future setting. Number 15. The cereal box cruise actually threw. Not every memorable beat in the film came from the screenplay. In one scene, Anderton returns home to a smart cereal box that recognizes him and starts singing a cheerful jingle directly at him. When Spielberg explained what the prop would do, Cruise reportedly reacted exactly the way he said he would in real life. According to Spielberg, Cruise told him flatly that if a box actually started singing at him, he'd throw the thing across the room and then did precisely that on camera. Spielberg loved the outburst immediately and kept the take in the finished film without hesitation. The reaction reads as spontaneous because it was a scripted, measured response would have played far more artificially than a man genuinely startled and annoyed by yet another piece of intrusive technology in his own kitchen. The moment works because it says more about the world of the film in a few seconds than a page of dialogue could. In a society where advertising follows you home and knows your name, a flash of real irritation lands as the most human reaction available, and it's one the film almost didn't have if Cruise hadn't simply done what he said he'd do. Number 16. A house built to shape a performance. To help Cruise settle into who John Anderton actually was, the production went further than costume fittings and script notes. According to Spielberg, speaking to Roger Ebert, the team built Anderton's apartment as a genuine, lived-in space rather than a bare set, and Cruise responded to it directly. As Spielberg described it, Cruise felt at home there and started developing ideas about how Anderton would actually behave just from being inside it. It's an unusual approach for a science fiction production spending most of its budget on gesture interfaces and automated highways, constructing an ordinary domestic space with enough specificity that an actor's performance choices could emerge from simply occupying it. The apartment wasn't dressed to look futuristic for its own sake. It was dressed to feel like somewhere a grieving, addicted man might actually live. That level of environmental detail speaks to how thoroughly the production's obsession with plausibility extended past the big set pieces. The same instinct that sent Spielberg to a Santa Monica hotel full of futurists also sent his crew into the granular work of building a home convincing enough to shape an actor's instincts about his own character. Number 17. The 10% Spielberg wouldn't allow crews. Fresh off the demanding physical work of Mission Impossible 2, pushed to perform several of this film's most dangerous sequences himself. Spielberg pushed back just as hard. By his own estimate, he blocked roughly 10% of the stunts crews proposed, refusing to let his star take on risks he judged unnecessary, regardless of what crews had gotten away with on other productions. The disagreement came to a head over one particularly dangerous sequence. Spielberg has recounted telling crews plainly that he hadn't directed Mission Impossible 2, and that he wouldn't have let crews attempt that specific stunt either, insisting a professional stuntman handle it instead. It was a rare instance of a director drawing a hard line against one of Hollywood's most famously hands-on action stars. Colin Farrell, only in his mid-20s at the time, and still finding his footing in a major American production, remembered Cruise's physical intensity on set vividly, describing him as extremely competitive and physically engaged, recalling him walking onto set and asking, half joking and half not, whether they were making an action movie at all. Spielberg's restraint kept that competitive energy from tipping into something the production couldn't safely absorb. Number 18. A building sliced open for the camera. One of the film's most technically impressive sequences shows mechanical spiders searching an apartment complex, gliding through an entire cross-section of the building floor by floor, while residents go about their evening, oblivious to the search happening around them. It looks like it has to be computer-generated. It isn't. Critic Roger Ebert, reviewing the film on release, singled the sequence out specifically as a real, physical set, rather than a digital construction, noting that most viewers would swear it had to be built with a computer. Inside that same sequence, Anderton submerges himself in a bathtub full of ice water to hide from thermal scanners sweeping the building floor by floor. There was no shortcut around the discomfort. The water was genuinely freezing, and the physical reaction registering on camera is exactly what it appears to be. The choice to build the apartment complex as a real, physically sliced open set, rather than rely on digital compositing, fits the same pattern running through nearly every other technical decision on the production. Wherever practical construction could achieve the effect, the filmmakers chose it, trusting tangible sets and real discomfort over the era's still developing digital tools. Number 19. Weeks spent underwater to play Agatha. To play Agatha, the most powerful of the three precogs, Samantha Morton spent weeks of filming physically submerged in a real tank of water, covered in motion capture markers, reacting to crime scenes that existed only on the page in front of her. It wasn't a performance built later inside a computer. It was weeks of genuinely uncomfortable, physically demanding acting, floating in a flotation tank meant to simulate the sensory deprivation the precogs supposedly experience. Because that same immersion left her character physically weakened, with muscles the film implies have atrophied from a life spent floating, Morton had to build a physicality for Agatha that read as frail and disoriented even once she was out of the water and on her feet, half dragged through crowded malls and stairwells by Anderton for much of the second act. To find that unsettling, unnatural posture, Morton reportedly didn't study other performances for inspiration. She studied the jerky, wide-eyed movements of her own young daughter, translating a toddler's uncoordinated physicality into something genuinely eerie on screen, a choice that gives Agatha's every gesture a strange, pre-verbal quality no amount of technical direction could have manufactured on its own. Number 20. The shot Spielberg found by accident. One of the film's quietest, most haunting images, Agatha and Anderton locked together in a strange, searching embrace, wasn't storyboarded or planned in advance. Spielberg has described discovering it entirely by accident mid-take, watching the two actors hug through the viewfinder and asking Morton to turn her head slightly for a better profile. What he saw stopped him. In his own words, he called cinematographer Janusz Kaminski over immediately, telling him to look at what had just appeared in the frame, insisting it was amazing. It was, in his description, simply there, discovered rather than designed, the kind of image a director recognizes in the moment, rather than one built up through rehearsal and blocking notes. That accidental discovery became one of the most reproduced images associated with the film, precisely because it carries none of the visible calculation that defines most of the movie's more elaborate sequences. Everything else in the production was engineered with obsessive intention. This particular moment simply happened, and Spielberg was paying close enough attention to notice it. 21. Billboards that already knew your name. As Anderton moves through the mall trying to evade capture, digital billboards scan his retinas and greet him by name, calling out personalized advertisements tailored specifically to his identity as he passes. In 2002, the idea read as pure exaggeration, an entertaining piece of dystopian excess rather than anything close to plausible marketing. The concept grew directly out of discussions at the 1999 Idea Summit about biometric identification and personalized advertising. It wasn't invented purely for shock value. Jeff Bortz of Concrete Pictures, the company that handled the film's fictional advertisements, has said the entire idea, from a script standpoint, was to make audiences feel the specific discomfort of a world where commerce already knows exactly who you are the moment you walk past it. Those billboards also happen to be real paid product placements, with Toyota, Nokia, Gap, Pepsi, American Express, and Reebok all buying screen time inside a sequence explicitly designed to critique invasive advertising. The film's commentary on a surveillance-driven ad economy and the film's own marketing strategy ended up occupying the exact same frame, whether the filmmakers intended that irony or not. Almost everything about this film was engineered to survive scrutiny. Real futurists, a genuinely functional interface, a building sliced open for the camera, freezing water an actor actually sat in. Spielberg chased plausibility so hard that pieces of what he invented for fiction eventually became products people use at work. The one thing that never got the same rigor was the ending itself, and that single buried scene of a son who never came home is the reason people are still arguing about what actually happens to Anderton more than 2 decades later. If you learned something new here, the like and subscribe buttons help more videos like this one find an audience. And I'm genuinely curious where you land. Do you think Anderton wakes up? Or is he still dreaming inside that halo? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.